There are a lot of feelings and a lot of narratives out there about Doc Rivers, but are they fair? Plus, injuries are starting to already have an impact in the league. How does this affect the Bucks? And is it possible we actually see Thanasis back on the Bucks roster this season? We'll get into all of this and more on the other side of the intro.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What it do? Welcome to Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis. You can catch me weekly on the Technical File podcast and the Pack a Day podcast. Joining me, special guest, Van Fayaz from brewhoop.com. We appreciate you for tuning in, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, Van, first, thank you for joining me on today's episode. Appreciate that. But there was an article that came out on The Athletic from Eric Name, and it was a feature with Doc Rivers discussing what drives him as a coach, mentioning the fact that Doc is entering into his 25th training camp as a head coach and getting ready for this upcoming Bucs season. And you know, as well as I know, there are a lot of conversations and a lot of feelings about Doc Rivers and what he can do, his track record, and if he's actually the right guy for the job. And my first question to you, just setting the table here, when you think about Doc Rivers, how long he's been coaching, he has won championship. There's been all the different 3-1 leads that his team has blown in the postseason, 3 of those that has people always pointing to, you know, when it's like, this is why Doc can't do it. But do you think that Doc Rivers is unfairly criticized, or do you think that a lot of the conversation around him is justified?
My opinion on Doc has evolved a bit since, you know, he took over as coach of the Bucks. I mean, I try to look at it maybe not as much through the lens of a Bucks fan now, just because he is the coach of the team, and I had certain feelings about him beforehand, and now it's like, oh, he's the coach of our favorite team. Like,
right.
We want to have, I mean, you want to feel positively about that guy, right? Even if he has some quote unquote baggage. I think with Doc, like, before he came in, after he left Philly and after he was fired, it was pretty easy to dunk on him, you know, and it was another 3-1 lead he blew, right? That was, no, there wasn't one in Philly.
No, not last year, or his last year.
It was the last one was in LA. You're right. I forgot about that. But he did blow a 3. They were up 3-2 in that series, going back to Philly, against Boston in 2023. So not as bad of a choke as the 3-1s, obviously. But, you know, looking back at those now and trying to sort of rationalize them a little bit, just because he's the coach of the Bucks. This is who they have. And to be clear, like, I like Doc as a person. He's really nice. He's a lot of fun in press conferences. This, you know, anyone who's covered the team knows. And he's just like a really down to earth and pretty like genial guy. So I just want to put that out there. I think he, as a coach, there's a bit, I think there are a few things that are maybe he's unfairly saddled with. Like, one of those 3-1 series, you know, chokes, if you want to call it that, with the Clippers was the year that, let's see, I think Chris Paul was hurt.
Chris Paul got injured one of those.
And didn't Blake Griffin get hurt in that series too? Or was that a different year? Regardless, he did not have a healthy team when that happened. So, you know, and Chris Paul was really what made those Lob City teams tick, right? So you kind of rationalize it that way.
About that, Van, the one that stands out to me, where I'm like, of the 3-1 losses or blowouts that they've had that stand out to me, was the one in the bubble.
The bubble, yeah.
That's the one where I was like, that was just a collapse with the Clippers, where they just completely fell apart. But the other two, if I remember correctly, like, there were some things around it where you're just like, I could see how this happened.
Yeah, and one of them happened when he was in Orlando, I believe. But so a long time ago we're talking about. But yeah, the one in the bubble is really the one that you can't really maybe hand wave away as much. Just because the bubble was such a weird situation, right? Like, I mean, I don't want to be that guy who's like putting an asterisk on anything from the bubble, but I mean, I kind of do. Like, there were some, I think a lot of people point to like, oh, there was a lack of, crowds and things like that. Yeah, there was, but the real thing that made it different was the complete lack of travel. I mean, if you were like, think about what that finals would have been if it was, under normal circumstances, Miami versus LA. That's
flights.
a 3-hour time difference. It's a 6.5 hour flight. I've done it a couple times. It's a lot to deal with. So I think like there were just, and they would have been playing some games in Denver had that series that they lost to the Nuggets been under normal circumstances. Big home court advantage in Denver too. So, there's kind of like it kind of balances out, right? Like, oh, there's not the travel issues, but then, the home court advantage, that kind of stuff. It's hard to really like, I mean, it wasn't normal, but it's also hard with that particular series because the Clippers were healthy. And that was, I mean, probably the best team of the Kawhi and Paul George era. It is hard to sort of, justify blowing that, even with the circumstances of the bubble. So, yeah, I think the criticism was largely fair about him to a point. I think coming into Philadelphia, like I would have said most of the criticism is fair, but we also got to recognize, I mean, he says in the article, 25 years, only 2 losing seasons. I don't know where he ranks on the all-time wins list, but I mean, it's got to be in the top 10. Is that right?
He's top 10 for sure.
Yeah. I mean, he is going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. Like, you're 4th all-time in the coaching wins list, and you have a championship. Much lesser coaches have made it in the Hall of Fame with that kind of resume. So, we give him his flowers for that. I think with Philadelphia, a lot of how you try to rationalize it again is like, well, he had Joel Embiid and James Harden both those years, and that's a pretty those are guys who have pretty checkered playoff histories, I would say. So you look at him now with this team, with the Bucks, a healthy team, and I don't think you have to squint to see him having a lot of success with the team in the postseason, as long as people are healthy. I think last year, had Giannis been healthy, this is a team that would have gone to the Eastern Conference Finals. That's just my opinion.
I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility at all. And to clean that up, Doc Rivers is 8th in wins, 4th in playoff wins. So top 10 guy when it comes to wins as a coach. And I loved when Doc Rivers himself said this, because I was like, I hear Doc Rivers talk a lot, but a lot of times, like, you don't hear him talk that talk. Like, he was really bigging himself up, and I like that energy. And Doc just came out and was like, I've never come up short in my own opinion. Come up short, like, what does that even mean? Like, we didn't win a title. I go back in Philly. I took that job after we lost in the first round, 4-0 to the Celtics in 2020. The next year, we win the East in the regular season. All right. Then we're 1 game away from the Eastern Finals. So there's times where I'm like, I'm being evaluated on a different standard. And the great news is I've created that standard. So for me, that's good. But then when the narrative comes that you can't do it, that's BS, because I've done it and I can do it. It's just hard to do it. It's just hard. So I've always looked at it that way. And I love that framing. I've said it before. When it was announced that Doc Rivers was getting hired, I was like, we had Doc Rivers at home. Like, that's my Budenholzer. Like, what are we doing here? But seeing what that team needed under Griff, just someone who could be a clear communicator, someone who had respect and can really communicate his vision, communicate roles, I thought was really important for this particular team. So I think, as funny as it sounds and as against, I could say, I guess, the Doc Rivers hire, I would have been directly after Mike Budenholzer. Getting him after Adrian Griffin and seeing this team, I honestly feel as if he's probably the right coach for this particular version of the Bucks, given the fact that you have to manage roles. You have 2 top 75 NBA players on this team. You have to figure out how to manage those egos, really, and just get them to play right. So, like, I hear the criticism of Doc. I get it. I do think some of it is a little bit unfair, but again, I do get it. But there's so much more we could talk about when it comes to Doc Rivers. I would encourage everyone to check out that article from Eric Name on The Athletic. goes more into depth than what we were able to do here. But when we come back on the other side of the break, we got to talk some injury news, man, because there are some things popping up around the league that can have an impact on the Bucks. So we'll get more into that after this. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. And I'm going to keep a buck with you. I'm going to keep it a real buck with y'all. I'm scary. Okay. I don't do Halloween movies. They freak me out. I can't watch scary stuff at night. Then I can't sleep. Like, I am scary. But this is the time of year when everyone loves all of the frights and delights that come with the season. And Halloween lets us have fun with what scares us. But what about those fears that don't involve zombies and ghosts? Therapy is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves back. Therapy isn't just for those who have experienced major trauma. It's something that can empower you to be the best version of yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, man. Some injury news, unfortunately, to discuss here. So the latest news that has come out is the fact that Precious Achiuwa of the Knicks, the forward center, he strained his left hamstring. He's going to be sidelined for at least the next 2 to 4 weeks. By that point, he's going to have his injury reevaluated. But the Bucks play the Knicks November 8th. That falls within that 2 to 4 week gap that, they might be without Precious Achiuwa. On top of that, you look at like the 76ers. I mentioned it last week with the injury to Paul George. He's still questionable for the season opener. Maxey got banged up as well. Don't think that's as serious, but something to keep an eye on. When you're looking at the injuries around the East, how do you think that that's going to affect the Bucks, especially that Knicks injury, given the fact that we're probably going to play them during this time where they're going to be without Achiuwa and they're already without Mitchell Robinson?
Yeah, one of the things I thought about the Knicks before the Karl Anthony Towns trade was I just we get the Shaq barbecue chicken stuff in my mind, barbecue chicken alert, because that was once we found out that Mitchell Robinson was going to miss, a couple months. So it looks like he's probably not going to play until after the new year at this point. Mm-hmm. That was a team that really was lacking in size. Precious Achiuwa he's a good defender, but he's undersized for a 5. I think he goes about 6'8".
6'8".
He has the bulk to play the 5, especially in smaller lineups. And, when the Knicks are playing the Bucks, they'll probably look to use Precious Achiuwa on Giannis a fair amount. Probably him and OG Anunoby and maybe a bit of Bridges. But he's out now for, he's not going to be reevaluated for 2 to 4 weeks, they say. So might not see him. But they now have Karl Anthony Towns. Then behind him, Jericho Sims, and then the guy who went 58th in the draft. I cannot pronounce his name, but he's going to be
Huckaporty or something like that.
Yeah. Isn't he German or something like that? He's got some European.
I know he's a 7-footer, like a legit 7-footer though.
Right, but a very inexperienced guy. So as it relates to the Bucks, I mean, Towns, what I thought he did in coming to the Knicks is he addressed a need that they had, but not like fully addressing the needs that they had at the center position. He gives them size. I mean, he's in his career, like on some of those crappy T-Wolves teams, he put up some bigger block numbers. And I think, if he's on a decent team, maybe, it was tough to say when he was playing under Tibbs in Philly. I wouldn't, or not in Philly, I'm sorry, in Minneapolis. I don't know if he was necessarily that engaged on defense either. You think like a lot of players, like once they're playing, for a good coach and in a good system, and on a winning team, they'll play better defense, right? I don't know if Cat has ever really done that. So for the Knicks, I mean, behind Cat, when he's off the floor, that's a really small team now, even with Jericho Sims or Hook Porty, however you say his name, in there. It's a team that the Bucks have absolutely the size to take advantage of, because they're going to have a height advantage over really everyone in that front court at all times. I mean, Portis is about 6'10". Obviously, Giannis is 6'11", pushing 7 feet, and Brook Lopez over 7 feet. So the Knicks will have Towns who can, compete with those guys, at least in terms of size. But do they trust him on the perimeter with Lopez? Do they even trust him in the paint with Lopez? Then they're giving up some size with either Anunoby or Bridges on Giannis or whoever else is playing the four, or if it's Portis. There's good defense on the wing and, among the forward core in New York, but there really isn't much rim protection. And even with Precious Achiuwa, I wouldn't have classified that team as having really great rim protection, just, based on their personnel, not until Mitchell Robinson comes back, at least. So I think the Bucks can really take advantage of that in the time that, Achiuwa will be out and Robinson will be out. I know they play them, of course, on the 8th, but I do think they play them one more time before the new year, if I remember correctly. So Achiuwa will be back by then, but I just don't think Precious Achiuwa is going to be the answer for them dealing with the Bucks front court guys.
Yeah, that was a question that I've had about the Knicks, especially after the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, which is just like, do they have enough depth on their bench as well? Like, I have no doubts or qualms about what they can do with their starting unit. I think that Karl-Anthony Towns being there really opens up the offense for them as well, just because you're adding a stretch big who seems like he's already developing pretty good chemistry with Jalen Brunson. So, like, offensively, it makes sense. The question I've had about the Knicks is just on the defensive end, saying, like, how much can those excellent wing defenders cover up if you have a weakness with Jalen Brunson, who is somebody who loves to take charges. He finds ways to, try to be involved defensively. And Karl-Anthony Towns, who is a big body, but isn't necessarily known as being like a rim protector, as you were saying. So it'll be really interesting to see, because, again, the Bucks do see the Knicks on November 8th. They see them again on January 2nd or January 12th, and then March 28th, only seeing the Knicks 3 times this year. So given how close I think the East can be, and a lot of people think the East might be, getting all of these wins is going to be as a priority for the team. So seeing them early with this particular injury, we're not going to get a full idea of what this team can be, but for the Bucks, it's something that they're going to have to try to take advantage of, the size advantage that they're going to have. And I think just generally, the size advantage is something that the Bucks should look to continue to try to take advantage of with most matchups. Just try to use that size over other teams, because, like we've talked about, they're not the fastest, most athletic, so on and so forth, but they have some size, they have some physicality. So got to try to lean into that for them. And then you got the 76ers. We don't know what that opening night lineup is going to look like. So make sure you guys keep it locked in to Locked On Bucks as we continue to get injury news heading into the season opener, which is a couple of days away. Can't believe that we're already this close to the season starting. Thank God, but you can't believe we're this close. There have been some trade rumors around some people on this Bucks roster. A little bit surprising, but it brings to the question, like, is the chance that we actually see the Nassas back in a Milwaukee Bucks jersey? We're going to dive into those rumors coming up right after this. It is one of the most wonderful times of the year. I'm not talking about Christmas. I'm talking about October sports, with the MLB playoffs, with football going on, with hockey, with basketball, not to mention college football. Like, everything is happening right now, and I love this time of year. So make sure that you are locked in with FanDuel. It is the best place to be whenever you get a hunch in the middle of a game. With FanDuel, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, $200, y'all, in bonus bets guaranteed, as Charles Barkley would say, when you place your first $5 bet. So make sure you hand over to FanDuel.com to get started. Again, that's FanDuel, FanDuel.com. Trade rumors. One might have thought this is not the season for some trade rumors, but lo and behold, for the Milwaukee Bucks, it just so happens to be. Jake Fisher reported earlier that the Bucks were open in trading, Marjon Beauchamp. And Keith Smith came on and added on to that part of the reason that, the Bucks are interested in possibly offloading Marjon is because the Bucks apparently have some interest in re-signing Thanasis Antetokounmpo, the older brother of Giannis, and also just a key locker room presence for this particular Bucks team. The Bucks roster currently sits at 15 players. So if they were to look to sign another player, they would have to figure out how to clear a roster spot. So Van, what do you make of all of this information, rumors around the Bucks having an interest in Thanasis and possibly be willing to give up Marjon to make that happen?
Well, the Thanasis news isn't surprising, right? I mean, I don't know where he necessarily is right now, Thanasis. I mean, I think he's been in Milwaukee a little bit.
In Brewer games and everything.
Yeah, he threw out the first pitch at a game, just like maybe right at the end of the regular season for the Brewers. So I mean, he's probably around. He's got his mom, his brother, his niece and nephews there. Makes sense that he stuck around. He's obviously rehabbing. He's not going to play basketball really until probably next summer, right? But I think, that 15th roster spot, as we've been saying for years, what's really the big deal about having that be filled by someone who rarely plays? I mean, it looked like that wasn't going to happen this year, and it was going to be all just young dudes at the bottom of the roster who would be the ones in that mix for playing time. And whereas Thanasis was the victory cigar always. But I think the locker room presence, that's important. Shouldn't overlook that. Of course, we always would have said, hope he can be an assistant coach, right?
Right.
That's not going to happen anytime soon. It seems like Thanasis is going to try to make a comeback. So I think that's fine. I think that's absolutely fine. I mean, he's not going to be taking away playing time from any of the young dudes. Whereas Marjon Beauchamp, I mean, I could see that happening. He could be taking time away from guys on the wing like Andre Jackson Jr. and maybe in the backcourt too with AJ Johnson. And I don't think that's going to be. I don't think Thanasis is going to be stealing as many minutes from even guys like Stanley Amude, right? Just because they know what they have with Thanasis, and his value to the team is not as an on-court player. But as far as Marjon Beauchamp goes, the most important thing about him is that, at least in regards to a trade, is that on the 31st, the decision on his fourth-year option is due. So right now he's under contract for this year, but whoever is employing him on October 31st, if it's the Bucks or another team, they have to decide whether to guarantee his contract for next season, 2025-26. So if there's going to be a trade, it seems likely that it would happen before that. If it doesn't, then I'd be surprised if you see him traded, at least in the interim. Maybe we get closer to the deadline. But, Beauchamp, he's kind of fallen a bit in the pecking order behind the young guys. If we go based on, how Doc allocated preseason minutes, we obviously saw AJ Johnson in the first quarter in some of these games, at least the games where, Giannis and the rest of the starters were playing, the actual rotation of the team. But even guys like Tyler Smith and, maybe and AJ Green a couple times were getting in there prior to Marjon Beauchamp. He was like a third quarter, fourth quarter guy, right? I think, there were. I'm sure y'all were talking about it in July. I can't remember, but there was a lot of chatter about him. How he looked in summer league, and it wasn't good. It wasn't good. I don't know if he's got a future in this league. As far as trading him, I was talking last week. I wrote about this on Brew Hoop about if the Bucks were to trade, let's say Pat Connaughton, who everyone wants to trade, you know, could they attach Marjon Beauchamp as like, you know,
a young sweetener
incentive? Exactly.
Yeah.
Because really, as I mentioned in this article, the only way you're going to get off Pat Connaughton's contract, at least now, like on, you know, October 21st, is by attaching draft picks, which the Bucks don't really have to attach. They only have a few. But maybe you can get away with a young player like him. And like by himself, I don't know if Marjon Beauchamp is going to fetch a great second round pick. I could see him maybe getting one of those top 55 protected picks, which don't really, you know, carry much weight. No, I mean, unless you're getting it from the Celtics or something like that. I don't, and those also, you acquire those. It's not like you're going to be able to really flip them in a trade for very much either. Not a great sweetener. I mean, his value is just very low right now. Same with Connaughton, where it's like, you know, they both have low value right now. And if you want to move them, kind of the best way to be able to trade either guy and get like anything useful in return is maybe to play them and like showcase them, right? Fisher also talked about how, or no, that was Smith who said that, one of them said that they were interested in acquiring a defensive-minded wing, which of course the Bucks are always interested in that. And you know, they have some guys who are that this year, like of course Taurean Prince, Wright can guard some bigger guards. Hopefully Andre Jackson, maybe at some point this year, and maybe even Justin's boy Chris Livingston are getting a chance to prove their mettle defending wings. But I don't think they're going to get someone necessarily like rotation ready for Marjon Beauchamp here. I think in terms of a player, if they were going to get just for Beauchamp, probably it would be like a change of scenery type candidate. But the issue is Marjon Beauchamp's making, let's see, $2.7 million this year because the Bucks are over the first apron. They're over the second apron, of course, but just being over the first apron means that they cannot take back more salary than they'd be sending out. So they'd be limited to basically another guy on a rookie deal or a minimum contract in trading Beauchamp. So, you know, maybe a change of scenery type guy or like a really end of bench type veteran, about all you could expect. And then if they're really trying to, you know, open up that roster spot for Thanasis, who will just, you know, be rehabbing the bench, then they're going to be trading him for, yeah, like I said, that heavily protected second, or I think that the worst case scenario would be cash considerations, just because like getting rid of a first round pick for that. I mean, obviously, like they're going to be taking a bit of an L moving on from him right now, just in terms of what they're going to get back, like a, what, 24th overall or so, 20s draft pick. You don't want to be flipping that for second round pick necessarily. It's not like, it's just not a good return on that investment, right? But, you know, addition by subtraction, or just opening up some roster space, some flexibility, I mean, that has value to the team too. So I think, you know, it's if they're taking that L, it's not like it's a big L. It's not going to be really like anything crippling. So
it would be just another first round draft pick for the Bucks over the last 10 years that hasn't worked out. Like there's been quite a few. Like Giannis hit for sure, but there have been some misses on the rest of that drafting strategy there.
Yeah, well, I think maybe I have a lot more optimism for the current crop of young guys who have appeared in the last 2 years on the, like in the draft, or even just coming off of two ways, like AJ Green. So maybe it's just, yeah, it might be another one of those like first round misses. But to be fair, the Bucks have only made, prior to this year, they'd only made 2 first round picks since 2018. Really, since John Horst was only his 3rd first round pick that he'd made this past year, because he did not have one from 2018 through 2022.
Trader John. Forget them picks. Let's get some players in the building now. So that's a great point to point out how many picks he's actually had. over the last few years. But yeah, Van, thanks for coming on. There is so much more coming this week on Locked On Bucks. Looking to get Frank and Justin on for an overs under Bucks preview as well, plus a little special guest, someone who you've seen on the Here District a time or two coming on the show this week ahead of the season. So there is a lot to dive into this week as we approach Wednesday's season opening game against the Philadelphia 76ers. As a reminder to everyone out there listening to this, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you find Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh Lloyd does his thing when it comes to fantasy basketball, so make sure you check that out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So for Van and myself, we're going to get out of here. Enjoy your Monday, and we'll talk to you soon.